Hi there, my name is James Gladfelder, and in the following, this was the talk I gave for the Galileo Commission. I came across them because of this booklet, this report, which is Beyond the Materialist Worldview, which really resonated with my ideas. And just to say, the description is the Galileo Commission was founded in 2017 with a view to expand the worldview of science beyond its limiting materialistic assumptions, which are seldom explicitly examined. A central and widely held assumption is that the brain generates consciousness and is therefore is extinguished at death. So, yeah, enjoy. The Sapient Cosmos towards a deeper understanding of reality and mind. The next 45 minutes are structured as follows. So, I would like to start by looking how the world is today, the status quo, and then try and find out why things are the way they are. And this inevitably brings us to analyzing the Western mind in greater detail. What exactly is going on in that thinking? And then finally, we can start to discuss more metaphysical details of consciousness and reality. And finally, to wrap up, we'll be considering what this could mean, this vision of scientific spirituality, and how this could help us move forward. Okay, so I seriously believe that we could be living in the best of all worlds. I mean, seriously, we have such amazing technology, literally alien technology. We have quantum computers, we have rovers on Mars, we have amazingly smart AI systems. So, I mean, we could shape the world in a way that would work for most people, but for some reason, it seems to be that actually we're actively trying to create the worst of all worlds. So, currently, we're in a polycrisis. We have devised linear systems of extraction and pollution. And we even had to invent a word for the damage that we're doing to the biosphere, ecocide. And we're destabilizing foundational support systems of the biosphere, for instance, the climate. And economic inequality has just reached absurd levels. I mean, just to illustrate, 1 million seconds are about 11 days. 1 trillion seconds are 31,700 years. I mean, this is just ridiculous and not sustainable. And the thing that seems to be is that inequality isn't a bug, it seems to be a feature of the financial systems we've engineered. And yeah, overall, the situation has got a lot more fragile. We're seeing geopolitical destabilization. And on the social side, we're seeing the erosion of the social fabric. Lying, cruelty, narcissism, these things have become accepted and normalized. And ideology has been weaponized, and we're seeing so many people becoming radicalized online, be this through fabricated outrage, rampant misinformation, and willful ignorance. And conspiracy theories are abounding, which is a problem because this takes many people to very dark places in their mind. So, overall, we seem to be losing this notion of a consensus reality in a post truth world. So, I believe it's fair to characterize the zeitgeist as follows. Individually, we are suffering from a crisis of meaning. What are we doing here? And collectively, we're suffering from a crisis of disenchantment. We're harming ourselves and the planet. What is going on here? So, I believe a reason for this enchantment is bad metaphysics, specifically metaphysics of limitation. So, on the one hand, we're told that a divine being is the source of creation. But this already has two problems. For one, this belief is usually disseminated through static and dogmatic theology, and it's heteronymous. It leaves the individual without control and accountability. On the other side, we have a more scientific approach claiming, hey, only physical reality exists and everything within physical reality is just physical processes. That's all there is. I believe this leads to something I call cosmic nihilism. So the universe is random, there has no meaning, and you just die, and that was it. So let's look at physicalism in a bit more detail, because this seems to be something that people believe comes out of science. So, I mean, physicalism is very intuitive. It's basically where you would start. I mean, it begins with logic and common sense, and it tries to understand the world how it appears to us, which is a good starting point. But the problem is that physicalism is a metaphysical belief. It is not something that comes out of science. It's not a scientific fact, even if a lot of scientifically thinking people and even scientists claim that this is so, because science is how stuff works. Science does not tell you what stuff is. This is metaphysics. And confusing the two is a really bad category error. And unfortunately, many scientists are trained in philosophy. So as a result, physicalism masqueraded as a scientific fact for many centuries, and only slowly now we're looking at this more closely and realizing that this actually is just a belief that cannot be proved or disproved. And it's amazing that physicalism has stayed around for so long, because in 1905, our intuition of what the foundations of reality should be got shattered. I mean, literally, the foundations, this was a seismic shift, because in 1905, the theory of special relativity was put forward. So suddenly, these things which we thought were foundational and unmoving, time or sort of not changeable, time and space, they are suddenly intertwined, and they depend on your point of view and what you're doing. And most frighteningly, the reality of the quantum realm was proved to exist and be true that year. So, just to be clear, the quantum realm is really super weird. It defies all our common sense and logic and expectations of rationality. So, we have duality. Things can be particles or waves depending on how you look at them. And there's this limit to how much information you can have of certain properties. There's this uncanny uncertainty. And one of the hallmarks of the quantum world is that things can exist in in sort of manifesting multiple states at the same time. So it's sort of things are in these ghost-like superposition where it's showing or having the potential of being everything at the same time, and only when you look at it, it decides to be something specific. And we know from entanglement that if two particles interact, you can move them arbitrarily far away, and they're still somehow linked in a weird way. And the measurement problem, which we know that there's no way to objectively measure something. As soon as you try and measure it, you're actually changing it and influencing it. And even weirder, measurements are contextual. They don't have a standalone meaning. They're always embedded in a greater context. So if we look at kind of the realism at the quantum level, it's so wildly different to our classical experience of reality. So consider this list of very commonsensical and cherished beliefs about reality. So classical realism, which states things have predefined properties, and it doesn't really matter if you look at them or not, they're still there. Or local causality, meaning that two things cannot be influenced by something which is moving faster than light. And single worldness means that if you perform a measurement, there's only one single outcome. And observer independence means, in this context, that if a fact is established for one observer, it should be true for all observers. I mean, come on, these are just no brainers. This is clear that this should be something we expect reality to behave in. So, unfortunately, quantum physics tells us we need to give up at least one of these things on this list, probably more. So, again, this is such a fundamental blow to kind of our intuition, our naive sort of assumption that reality should work in a way that we can understand and comprehend. So again, I wonder why physicalism just sort of could stick around for so long when these challenges, these existential challenges were there and known for such a long time. So, in a nutshell, reality is not the single shared observer independent world our common senses assume. This is just a fact. And just to continue down this rabbit hole, the list of existential enigmas is really pretty long. So, usually scientists don't really advertise this, but they're true. For instance, we do not know what time is, seriously. Um, Neither philosophers nor physicists know what time is, which again is so weird as it seems something so close and intuitive. And we still, to this day, do not have an overarching theory which combines the small and the large. We don't have quantum gravity. I mean, we've trying to unify these two realms for decades, and we even went through the detour of string theory, but nothing worked. We still do not know how we can bring these two together and what this means. And there's even newer theories which is saying maybe gravity isn't really a force, it's more something emergent coming from entropy or something. So yeah, and of all the stuff that exists in the universe, we do not know what 95% of it is. We just see indirect effects. This is called dark matter and dark energy. And some cutting edge theories are proposing that space and time are not fundamental at all, but derived from something deeper, something more fundamental, perhaps entangled quantum information, whatever that means. And we know that during the Big Bang, the same amount of matter and antimatter was produced, but where did this antimatter go to? We're not seeing this. And since the James Webb Telescope launched, cosmology has been in crisis. We are seeing structures and properties of galaxies which shouldn't be there if the standard model of cosmology is true. So, yeah, this is quite bad. And the fine tuning problem begs the question, why are all the constants of nature set to such a specific value that it allows complexity, life, and consciousness to emerge? Because we know that if we just change some of them by a little bit, this wouldn't happen. Things would just clump together or just spread apart. And why the book of nature? So, how come that humans can sit in a dark room and devise thought systems in their head, which then suddenly turn out to map the outer structure and the workings of the cosmos? What's up with this connection between our inner thinking and the mechanics of the universe? I mean, Eugene Wigner called this the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences. And one of the biggest issues for science is, why emergent complexity? So, why do we have self organized structure formation? I mean, apparently it's happening. We're seeing this here in our bubble on Earth. But what is driving it? What are the forces that allow this to happen? Because we don't see them. From a physicalist perspective, we just shrug and say, well, it's a brute fact. That's what happened. So, yeah, there's nothing to see here. And finally, we know that the hard problem of consciousness is also a serious challenge to this physicalist notion that consciousness is produced in the brain. So the hard problem asks, how can stuff that has no subjectivity, has no inner perspective, come together and magically produce this unified experience of a world, sort of open up this window into reality? How is this possible? And yeah, the hard problem was posed in 1994. And to this day, it's split up the philosophy of mind into two camps, where the one sort of one side of the camp says, well, the solution here is that consciousness doesn't really exist. It's an illusion. So the thing you think you are isn't true. And the other end of the spectrum in the camp, they say, well, maybe consciousness plays a bigger role than we thought in the physical. Okay, so did the Western mind miss something? I mean, all this success in like understanding and shaping the world was great, but somehow we're just stuck, and we're not really progressing. I mean, in the foundations of physics, nothing has really happened in decades, and we're not moving closer to understanding reality at a fundamental level. So did something go missing? And I would say this is a definite yes. And this is sort of brings us to the topic of what exactly is the Western mind. And it turns out to be quite weird. So in 2020, the anthropologist Joseph Henrich published the book, The Weirdest People in the World: How the West Became Psychologically Peculiar and Particularly Prosperous. So he used weirdos as an acronym for Western, educated, industrialized, and rich. And what he shows is that, contrary to all other cultures that have existed, the Western mind underwent a very sort of specific shift. It sort of reimagined itself in a very specific way. For instance, people stopped seeing themselves in this web of interactions with other people, kind of this relational web, these sort of tribes, and the focus became sort of very hyper individualistic, and the whole worldview kind of shattered from this holistic understanding that everything is connected to everything and interrelated, to an atomized view of reality. And overall, the shift went from subjectivity to objectivity, which is where science starts. So, this is the shift from the first person perspective to the third person perspective. And humans stopped seeing themselves as part of nature, but a force that should manipulate and change nature. So these things led to sort of a very constrained way the Western mind operated. And like the most striking thing is that the Western mind just basically or just majorly focused on looking outward, trying to decode the outside world. And it didn't really stop too much to look inside and try and figure out what is going on within consciousness. So just as a side note, until about 1990, the idea of, or the topic of consciousness was seen as a fringe topic in academia, and young scientists or scholars were told not to touch this topic. It was something you could then do if you're older. It's something like, I mean, it's sort of an unscientific thing, consciousness, like the soul. And only since 1990, academia in the West has been taking this topic seriously. So, yeah, it was really a focus on decoding the outer world. And importantly, the only state to be in is sober waking consciousness. All other states are either impure or delusional. And there's only one way to access knowledge, and this is through rational thinking. So, yeah, this has led to some glaring blind spots in the culture of the Western mind. So, this whole sort of dimension of interiority and interior knowledge and sort of interior literacy just got exiled. This was totally not something that any emphasis was put on, which means that this whole wealth of phenomenality was excluded. Like, I don't know, half of existence, the things that are appearing in us, in our consciousness, was just neglected, and the sort of the gaze was just going out. So like a huge chunk of being and existence was just overlooked and deemed irrelevant. And this is in contrast to nearly all other cultures that ever existed, because they started to work with the thing that they are. They started to work with their own consciousness and look inside. And this, as a result, what came out is that many cultures developed these consciousness technologies. So the Western mind always praises itself with this amazing technology it produces, but again, this is outward technology, physical technology. What other cultures have come up with are consciousness technologies. And I like to call them the masters of consciousness. These are the shamans, the mystics, the meditators, and the psychonauts. So the friendly looking couple here is the Shulgins. He was a biochemist and he synthesized hundreds of novel psychedelic substances. And he and his wife tested them all and wrote down the effects very meticulously and published 2 books on what they'd found. So let's look at shamanism. It's the oldest human spiritual tradition, and depending on who you ask, it goes back 20, 50, 70, or even longer, 1,000 years back. And it's this remarkable, universal, consistent human phenomenon that just popped up all around the world. And for the shaman, it's very clear that next to physical reality, there is this spirit realm, this non physical realm of reality that is there and you can access, and you gain access through non ordinary states of consciousness. So in shamanism, this is either through trance, like drumming, or entheogens. This is the ritualistic use of psychedelics. And apparently, shamans have access to non orthodox ways of generating knowledge. This, for instance, is seen in their amazing pharmacological wisdom. And to them, the cosmos is animistic, everything is ensouled, and they practice symbolic cognition, which means that the universe is speaking to you and you have to just pay attention and decode what it's saying. Everything has meaning. The eagle flying above your head, the signs, the changes in nature, all this has a meaning and you can understand it. And basically, shamans are these intermediaries moving between the physical and non-physical realms. Mysticism takes us to ancient India, where the rishis were these forest dwelling mystics, and they started to compile the Vedas. And in the Abrahamic traditions, we have the Kabbalists, the Gnostics, and the Sufis. And in ancient Greece, there were these mystical celebrations called Eleusinian mysteries, which were celebrated for over 1,000 years. And in China, we have this Taoist mysticism that emerged. And the core aspect here is that the mystic experiences the divine directly in or through their consciousness. So the divine is not something external, it is something you can touch and experience. And it's also about divine inspiration. So this means that you're sitting by a river and suddenly it strikes you and you understand how the universe works. And non-ordinary states of consciousness also play a role, and they're induced by meditation, prayer, or sometimes just spontaneous epiphanies. And it's interesting that most mystic traditions give you a very detailed account of how the divine is manifesting and unfolding in the physical, how it's disclosing itself in the physical. Although overall, what we're talking about here is transcendental and ineffable. There are no rational ways, there are no concepts or language that can allow you to sort of transmit what is being experienced. And for the mystics, it's clear that physical reality is just one plane of existence and there's multiple others. And this is something similar to the shaman cosmology, where they have this axis mundi with the physical realm and below it the underworld and the overworld, and this seems to have a similar structure. And for the mystics, the divine is the ultimate ground of existence, ultimate reality. The meditators also bring us back to ancient India, where in the Vedas and the Upanishads, these spiritual and contemplative traditions were started to be discovered and written down and practiced, and then later Buddhism sort of elaborated on that. And further down we have the Yoga Sutras, which in the West, yoga is just seen as sort of the bodily movements, but kind of cultivating a mastery of your mind is one huge aspect of the whole sort of spiritual tradition of yoga. And it's interesting that only in 1893 did this knowledge travel to the West, when Swami Vivekananda introduced the notion or the ideas of Hinduism and yoga to a Western audience. And it's remarkable that through neuroimaging studies, we know that meditation has profound neuroplastic effects. It rewires the brain, literally. And especially seasoned meditators with 50,000 or 60,000 years of 60,000 hours of meditation show very drastically different neural wiring to normal people. And studies have even shown that people who never meditated, if they meditate for 45 minutes a day for 8 weeks, you can already see changes in the neural wiring. And again, this is all about finding knowledge by introspection, by looking inside, be this also through intuition or just sort of spontaneous sort of insights. And enlightenment is seen as the ultimate expression of what consciousness can be. And for the meditators, it is clear that sort of the source of this truth and sort of the knowledge of how to liberate your consciousness lies within you. This is a tool you have. This is not something external you have to find. You come equipped sort of with access to these sources. And yeah, in these traditions, primordial awareness is understood as this foundational reality. So the psychonauts. The ethnobotanist Terence McKenna was wondering what's up with this cognitive revolution that happened 50,000 or 70,000 years ago in the evolution of human consciousness, because there was this cognitive explosion. Something must have changed. And McKenna thought, well, what if sort of these ancient humans who were then migrating stumbled upon magic mushrooms, and hence psilocybin kickstarted sort of this cognitive spark. Of course, all the academics laughed at him and thought this was a very stupid idea. But if you think about it, I mean, this is sort of the core phenomenological content of psychedelic states, that you feel that your brain is just working at a higher level, that you're just connecting more dots, you're just thinking faster, you're just having access to more sort of content in your consciousness. So yeah, from people who have experience in this actually does sound like something worth considering. And yeah, the archaic roots go back to entheogenic shamanism. And there is serious scholarly work that suggests that Soma, which was revered as a god in the Vedas, but was also some sacrament, was actually psychedelic, which kind of then opens to the question how much of these Indian wisdom traditions, this spirituality was actually also influenced by psychedelic states. And there's also serious scholarly work that points out that these Eleusinian mysteries, this was centered around this potion called Kaikion, which scholars suspect was also some sort of psychedelic, which then, yeah, ask the question. So everyone who was anyone in Greece that time, they participated in these celebrations, as did Plato. So how much of Plato's philosophy, which is so fundamental to Western philosophy, was actually inspired by altered states of consciousness? And if you think about it, the things he talked about, like this non-physical realm of pure forms, or the allegory of the cave, I mean, these are all things you would expect your psychonaut friend to tell you. And Brian Murarescu published a book called The Immortality Key in 2020, where he presented kind of evidence, after researching this for many years, that actually Christianity also had psychedelic roots. But of course, this was all erased, and all the knowledge of sort of, yeah, these early influences were then sort of, yeah, taken away. And today we're seeing the renaissance of an idea that goes back to William James and Henry Bergson and Aldous Huxley. So the idea here is that the brain does not produce consciousness. The brain filters consciousness. which means that psychedelics open up the valve, and that's why you get this tremendous influx of transcendence. But in order to survive, your brain has to down level or close and just sort of reduce this information richness into what Huxley called a measly trickle of our awareness. And it's interesting that psychedelic neuroscience is only quite recently discovering that nearly all psychedelics are very neuroplastic. They rewire your brain. And what was also interesting, since the first neuroimaging studies of people under psychedelics were performed in 2012, neuroscientists had to come up with a new mechanism for subjectivity. So the standard story is, of course, well, your phenomenological content of what you're experiencing is driven by neural activity. So, more activity and the more sort of subjectivity you experience. Makes sense. Well, the problem with these neuroimaging studies was and still is that this is not what we see. This is not shown to be true. And that's why then neuroscientists said, okay, look, no, it's different. So when you're sober, that's only then neural activity corresponds to sort of richness of your awareness. When you're on psychedelics, it's entropy in the brain which explains the phenomenology you're experiencing. So noise, and why would states which are so informationally rich, which are full of just radical novelty, you see colors you've never seen, you have concepts which transcend rationality, so these should be driven by entropy. I mean, to me, this just sounds like shifting the goalpost in an attempt to just uphold this physicalist assumption. The brain has to be the producer of consciousness. And yeah, that's how we get around the problem that people under the influence of psychedelics are not, their brains are not lighting up like Christmas trees. And if you ask psychonauts, they tend to make three experiences of reality. Either it's this field of consciousness, this structuring intelligence, or this divine love. So recently, I participated in two ayahuasca ceremonies. So metaphorically, I got up out of the armchair and got my hands dirty. First of all, ayahuasca is just this amazing concoction because it takes leaves of some specific bush which has DMT in it. DMT also occurs naturally in humans, and it's a psychedelic. And it combines it with the bark of some vine because that contains the MAO inhibitors, which prevent the DMT from being digested, so it reaches your brain and has psychoactive properties. Now, imagine you're sitting in the rainforest with an approximately estimated 80,000 plant species. So it's not just combining this with that, it's also figuring out, do we take the root, do we take the bark, do we take the leaves, do we take the fruit, how much of each, what are the sort of the different amounts, how do we extract it? I mean, there's a lot of things which had to be done right. Of course, the physicalist just shrugs and says, well, either it was just dumb luck or trial and error, probably. But if you ask the shamans, they give you a very specific answer. They tell you, well, what do you think? The plants told us. Because for them, plants are teachers. They are entities that have wisdom and knowledge. And that's exactly the job of the shaman, to go into the non-physical realm and extract this information. So the experience itself for me was epistemically shocking. I was just absolutely and totally overwhelmed by the complexity, the speed, the information richness. I just remember thinking, I can't believe this is happening. I'm just not prepared for this. This is just too much. And I also had an entity encounter where this very strong presence was there, and it was neither human nor animal. It was just, yeah, just beyond anything I'd ever imagined or experienced. And it felt like sort of the veil had been lifted, and I could see the intelligence behind the things that exist. And this intelligence was just so vast that it literally just crushed my puny human intelligence and brain. I mean, this literally, yeah, epistemically shocking. But it gave me a first-hand experience what it means sort of sort of distinguish between rational knowledge and experiential knowledge. So if you think about it, rational knowledge is like contained in this sphere, but what you can experience, like experientially know, is so much bigger. I mean, this is just a huge thing, and rational knowledge is just such a small subset of what is possible. And although these states are ineffable, I mean, the words I used are just a bad approximation of what I somehow felt or remember happening. But somehow these experiences also leave some somatic imprint in your body. And I experienced this 3 months later when I had a spontaneous flashback where I experienced this full body memory recall of a state I'd been in during the ceremony, which I had no intellectual recollection of, but suddenly everything came back, this whole feeling and knowing. And yeah, that's quite dramatic when you experience that. And this really made me appreciate even more these shamanic consciousness technologies. I mean, the wisdom, the incredible knowledge, and sort of the ability to sort of structure ceremonies around this, to sort of carry this over millennia and practice this. This is amazing. And in contrast, it made me realize or ponder the stupidity of the Western mind. I mean, literally, we are so clever. I mean, with sort of looking outward and decoding the world, and with our philosophies and sciences and theologies and everything up in the head and rational, but somehow the Western mind never stopped and looked inside and was inquisitive about what dimensions are going, what is accessible, what is happening here, what is possible, what can I experience. I mean, just it's just mind-blowing how this blind spot just never really bothered the Western mind and made it reconsider that, oh, maybe it's not just out looking, maybe we should also look inside. So this brings me to the concept of empirical metaphysics. So this is the idea that actually by modulating your consciousness, by entering altered states of consciousness, you are making experiences that actually uncover properties of reality which otherwise are not accessible. So there's no way you're going to know them through rational thinking. And the idea is because, in the sense empirical, because some of these experiences are actually repeatable. Different people keep coming and making the same experiences or observations, or have the same takeaways. So yeah, this sort of opens up to this idea that maybe, yeah, although subjectivity from a scientific point of view is like something which is deemed very unreliable because people misremember, they lie, but maybe, yeah, we actually should try and focus more on the content of what is happening during these extremely different states of being which you can enter, um, from and starting sort of from or sort of moving away from then this default state of sober waking consciousness. So this is about trans-rational experiences. These are experiences which go beyond rationality, but they're not irrational. Again, there's something you can know experientially. They make sense. They feel it feels coherent. It's not something which somehow then, when you're back, suddenly falls apart and you think, oh, that was stupid. And this idea that there is different ways of accessing knowledge, not only through rational thinking. I mean, we kind of accept this idea of intuition, or there's been scientific breakthroughs where people have dreamt certain things, which then sort of guided their discovery the next day or next week or whatever. But that this is something more systematic and something which can sort of really be explored is yeah, an idea that we should take seriously. And it appears that we live in the transcendental multiverse. So, yeah, sober waking reality renders this physical plane of existence, which is just a thin slither in this huge and vast transcendental multiverse of pure experience, which anyone can go and explore who's brave enough to go beyond the comforting familiarity of consensus reality. So, be this through meditation, trance, breathing techniques, or psychedelics. And what all the masters of consciousness seem to be telling us is that behind the things that exists, there is this field of cosmic consciousness, which brings us to the idea of metaphysical idealism. So this is something that is being that has been pointed to by so many cultures except sort of the Western rational thinking mind. And I mean, idealism is the claim that mentality is fundamental and that the physical is derived from this ground of pure awareness. So, the Sapient Cosmos, which came out last year, 2025, um, in here I tried to sort of chronicle this renaissance of idealism, not only in philosophy, but also in some parts of science, especially the foundations of physics. And yeah, I'm not going to go into that here at the moment, but just as a teaser, I propose this idea of syncretic idealism, which sort of combines different expressions of idealism with this information theoretic paradigm that's going on in physics and with complexity science. So, if you want to know more about this, you can check out my blog posts on Medium, where I try and sort of give brief discussions of these things. So, what do we do now? So what? What does this mean? Like, how does this help in any way? Why? Well, I do believe that maybe it's time that we consider sort of combining the best of both worlds, sort of the best from the outward looking technology and the best of the consciousness technologies. And this means that we should try and consider this possibility of scientific spirituality. So, spirituality in the most generic sense is just the invitation that you engage with your own consciousness. You look inside, you sit down, close your eyes, and try and engage with these inner worlds, this inner universe. And we should really come back to understanding the holistic nature of reality, because literally nothing exists in isolation. Everything is interconnected in this web of existence. And ideally, this is an open minded and non dogmatic exploration. And we should, as a foundation, adopt a metaphysics that is empowering, or at least we should reject this naive physicalism. And the reality part, the scientific part is that we should engage with consensus reality. We should not fall into rabbit holes of conspiracy. So this means that we should not only foster rational thinking, but also these other modes of experiential and symbolic cognition, that we try and sort of experience more and try to decode more of the things that are happening around us. So, in essence, scientific spirituality asks us to listen not only to the shamans, the mystics, the meditators, and the psychonauts, but also the scientists. So, if we want to change things, collective transformation begins with personal transformation. And I believe that it is our duty to become happier people, and that we find a way to adopt a metaphysics that is enchanted. By the way, I wrote a longer piece on Substack on how to live a happier life. So, but the question or the problem here is that there is no certainty. I mean, we are forever locked in consciousness. We only ever have an indirect sort of mirror or perception of the outside objective world. I mean, literally, I could be dreaming now and waking up, or this could be a simulation, or I could be sort of a brain kept alive in a vat and fed with fake electrical signals that mimic the signals my brain is receiving now. And this disembodied brain would have the same world emerge in its dark neural network. So, or kind of the idea that only my consciousness exists, solipsism. There's no way I can disprove or know that this is not true. So we first of all need to know from all the metaphysical ideas, which are all not provable, which one should I choose, and how do I live with this ambiguity? So I find we should follow the sort of the inspiration of the masters of consciousness and consider the possibility that reality extends beyond the physical. Now, you don't have to literally believe in the transcendental multiverse, that it's really a thing out there. It's enough that it is something you can experience within your own consciousness. But I think the crucial thing is that um, to explain consciousness, we have to move outside of space and time. So, this idea that consciousness is not produced by the brain but channeled by the brain, I mean, this is sort of a core keystone of this of a empowering metaphysics, which maybe then also at one point allows us to sort of have better scientific theories of consciousness. Just as a side note, one scholar counted over 300 theories of consciousness that we have currently in academia. So we have no clue what consciousness is. So we don't even have a good definition. So maybe a good metaphysics can help us sort of approach these enigmas better. And a good metaphysics should allow you to recontextualize some of the enigmas or sort of existential issues that have been troubling humanity forever. For instance, suffering. So, if there is this loving field of intelligence behind the things that exist, why suffering? What's up with suffering? Why do we see so much suffering? Well, the thing to observe is that if you're in a reality where things happen, this is necessarily dual. You have left and right, you have hot and cold, light and dark, happiness and sorrow. So this is structural. If something has to happen, if something has to exist, then its opposite has to be there as well. If you have a dual reality where things can be dynamic. So this means that suffering is in the structure, but it's not necessarily ontological. So there's no ontological evil in the sense that darkness isn't a thing in itself. So you don't switch on darkness. Darkness is the absence of the thing which exists, which is light. And the same is with good and bad. And with death. So if idealism is true, then what you should expect when you die is that you find yourself existing or continuing to exist in one of these levels in the transcendental multiverse. And there are studies which show that the phenomenology of near death experiences and DMT states are very similar. So, probably if we want to prepare for death and dying, what you should do in your life at least once is enter altered states of consciousness. Again, choose the method that sort of speaks to you best, but at least once have these non-ordinary experiences so you're not overwhelmed when you die. And meaning, so um, Carl Gustav Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, the Nobel Prize winning quantum physicist, they we're considering this idea of synchronicity. So many people experience that somehow a lot of things that happen randomly seem very purposeful and follow a pattern. And Jung and Pauli were wondering, well, maybe there's this higher layer of causality which is influencing the physical, which we haven't quite detected. And this would explain how the psyche and the cosmos are connected in a way. And again, this is something which idealism would also expect, because the thing you are inside is the same thing that is out there. So there should be this kinship, which is maybe mediated through meaning. But meaning also has an inner dimension. Meaning is something you can live and define for yourself. So meaning is intrinsic, but also extrinsic. And purpose. So in the will, so in the Sapient Cosmos, I propose this will to complexity. So there must be something baked into the evolution of the cosmos which allows for ever more complex systems to emerge. I mean, I don't believe that this is just a random thing that happened. There must be some teleology there. So And if we listen to the mystics and the psychonauts, um, what is maybe happening is that the complexity is trying to assemble ever more complex contraptions which can channel the base consciousness. So what the universe is doing, it's unfolding in a way that allows for ever more transcendence to come in and be brought into the physical. So the the cosmos is not only sapient, it's also sentient, and it experiences itself and knows itself through us. So we're not strangers here. We are the way the cosmos wakes up. So we really should start to behave like we belong here and take responsibility for shaping what the universe is becoming. Thank you.